moving forward in the course, here's our main view model. And you must have noticed that since we have added the is valid check and the password check for the sign up functionality, we need to store two things when a user login into the app. So basically, a user structure, a user object, or we could say, would contain obviously the email of the user and also a unique identifier. That identifier would actually be linked to all their posts, their followers, their following. So that is a very important thing for us to do. So we would have to create the very first structure inside our app now for storing the user data. And let's create a new group and let's call it models. And we can do command N to create a new file. Let's call this user data. Just keep in mind that this user data we are creating is just for the authentication purposes. It is not a user which would be stored in our Firestore database. It's not that. It's just for the authentication purpose, like whosoever is logged into our app. So in order to do that, we could do simply import Firebase. Then we can create a structure, call this user data. Then we could have two properties inside of it. First would be a UID, which would conform to the type string. The other one would be email, which would conform to the type optional string. Now you might ask, why would I keep it optional? Basically, you would notice that Firebase itself returns us an email, which is an optional property. So that's why we are keeping it optional. But as far as we know, we won't let anyone sign in without they put in an email, since we have the valid check inside the app. So from the front end, it's actually handled very well. So you don't need to think about getting an invalid email or something, or an empty email. And you notice that Xcode just gave it an initializer, which we actually needed. And we could modify this a bit to make it more readable for us. So we could have something like user, which conforms to user. And this user is none other than a Firebase user. You see, it's a class inside Firebase. So now what we are doing is that we would actually use user.uid and we would use user.email. And I think it would not throw an error if we import Firebase auth. So okay, that all works. We could just try running the app, because so far we have not really changed a lot of code. So it should not break in any such point. And while it's building, okay, so it just built, and hopefully it shows up with the auth view screen. Okay, so yeah, this all works fine. So how about we just go to the core of the app, and we notice that at one point of time we are just only showing one view, which is not really ideal, right? What if a person is logged in? We don't still want to show them the auth view. So for that purpose, let's just go inside our main view model, and we would need to add few more properties here now. You could either use a mark statement from here onwards, so that you could have different, you could have different properties after every mark, or you could just add everything inside here itself. But at some point, if you feel like it's becoming too many variables are being added, you could like keep them separate as per your needs, whatever is convenient for you. So let's just start by creating a user itself first of all. So we would have a published var, and let's call it user data. It would be of the type user data itself. which would be optional since we are not initializing it with some value, and this is some value that we would actually get back when the user successfully signs up or signs in. Now that we have a show toast boolean also and a toast message boolean also, we could have another property which would be a published var itself, and it would say is authenticated, which would be of the type boolean with a default value of false. Now you can just go back to the core of the app, come here, say if view model dot is authenticated is true. We just need to show the user with the main view, passing in the view model also. But if the user is not authenticated, we need to show them the auth view. This much is done. Let's just go back to our view model, and now we'll proceed with creating our functions. I also check this one thing, that yes, we would have the sign in and sign up function, which would change the authenticated value, which would be checked here. But what if a user is already signed in? They then close the app and then come back again. They don't need to be shown with auth view again, right? So there must be some way that whenever the class is initialized, it should return us with an is authenticated value. How about this, that we actually create a function, and let's call this function and keep it private as well because it's just being used for authentication. Check authentication. What this function does is that it would check if there is a current user, and if it is not, it would put this value to false. If it's present, it would put this value to true, and then we could use this functionality inside the init block of our class. And you may have noticed that our main view model is only initialized at one place, and that is the main core view of our app as this. So the initializer is called here, and since inside our initializer we do have the functionality to change is authenticated. So if the user signs up or signs in, closes the app and then come back, they would still get authenticated. Now, how would we actually know like if the user is authenticated? Do we use user defaults for it, core data for it, or something like that? But you would be surprised to know that Firebase actually provides us with this very powerful functionality. And for that purpose, since we would be changing a value, we are doing this on the main queue. So let's write dispatch queue dot main dot async, and inside this block of code we would first unwrap that if let user, if there is a user which exists currently inside the auth class, which is of the Firebase classes, which is one of the Firebase classes, and I have already imported Firebase auth for this. You might need to do it too, in case I guess it also works for Firebase. Now we would actually access the auth property, which gives us the auth object for the default Firebase app. So let's just click on enter, and we're going to use this multiple times throughout the app, and we can actually get a current user from here. So it says synchronously gets the cached current user, or null if there is none. So it's good for us, but that's why we are optionally unwrapping that if there is a current user, what we need to do is that we need to set our is authenticated to true, and also we would actually set our user data, which we just created with the help of the user that we are getting from here. Now that we have done this much, but suppose if there is no current user in the cache of Firebase itself, we would actually have these two block of code, these two lines of code again, but this time it would be false and user data would be nil. Hence that's why we have this property as an optional, because it might not be true that whenever we are logging in or whenever we are opening the app, the user, there is a cache user present inside the app. So this was the functionality that we needed to do in order to check if the user is present, logged in or not. Now let's just move on to the sign out, sign in and sign up functionality. Out of these three, the sign out is the simplest one. So in this course, we are primarily using async await from Apple. Async await is a really good feature, I would say, and it eliminates the use of completion handlers. So in order to do this, we would actually see an example in sign in and sign out. Meanwhile, for the sign out functionality, sign in and sign up, my bad. Meanwhile, for the sign out functionality, we actually just need to do a simple do catch block. So we do write the do catch block. What goes inside here? So we would try this functionality, that try auth and then the auth object we call the sign out, and it says signs out the current user. Okay, this is well and good that we have signed out the current user, but does this set our is authenticated to false, or does it set our user data to nil? I don't think so it does that, because it's a Firebase functionality. It's not something specifically made for an app. For our app, I mean. Our app has these custom things that we have added. So Firebase is not aware of it. So in order to complete this whole thing, we would actually need to do it ourselves. So we open dispatch queue again. Since we are again changing the properties, so it has to be done on a main thread. And after writing the async code, we would simply copy these two lines of code, paste it here again. So now not we are just signing out from the Firebase, but also we are setting our properties manually to nil and false in order to make sure that our app is completely signed out of any user. What happens if this all fails? We could actually print out the error. And there's one more feature that we could later on add on, that we could show the user with an alert. So when we would be working out with alerts, we would actually come back here and add the alert functionality here. So the user is thrown an error in case they are not able to sign out. So now that we have printed error signing out, this works all well and good. Now you could just go about working with the sign in functionality. So the very first thing we would need to do is check whether our email and password properties are empty or not. So there's this functionality given by Swift itself, and it goes on to any string or an array also, which says is empty. So is empty is a boolean value indicating whether a string has no characters. So this simply means that the email is empty. We need to check that the email is not empty. That's where we are using I totally forgot what this character is called. So basically it reads as not empty, and similarly we would need to actually do it for password itself. Now that we have done this much, we could write an else statement and we could return from here, but before returning we could add a print statement here as well. This is for our convenience while debugging and working with the code, that email or password came out to be empty. So it makes things easier for us. Now that we have done this simple check, we would actually move on to work with the async await functionality. So in order to do that, if I were to use async await directly inside this function, I would actually have to mark it as async, stating that it's an asynchronous function. But there's a shortcut in Swift as well. I won't specifically call it as a shortcut because it also means that you would need to call this function wherever you are calling this function. As far as I remember, we are calling this function inside our action button in our auth view. We would actually need to unwrap it in a task closure. So the T needs to be caps. If we were to call an asynchronous function. But to just keep the whole code a bit cleaner, what I've thought of is that we could actually wrap the whole code inside task here itself inside our function. So again, we would start with a do catch block, and let's just write the catch statement also. How will we actually go about signing in a user? So from what I know, we just use the auth object for signing out. So that means we could actually do the signing in by the auth object itself. So we could write auth object, then we could do sign in, and it gives us a lot of options from which we would actually need with email and password. So we could write email and we could write our password here, which are the two properties we have already defined in our view model. So does this function return us with something? In order to do that, let's option click here, and it should give us, okay, so it does have a completion handler, and it says it gives us an auth data result. But since it's referencing to the old completion handler methodology, how about we assign it with let result, and we mark it as try await, and hopefully if I option click on result now, it takes in an auth data result now. You could also command click here, and let's just not go into the documentation then. And now again, since we have done this much and results hold our auth data result of a user who just signed in, we again need to update our properties, and those properties include is authenticated and our user data. So following the previous examples, we would actually need to just do a dispatch queue because it has to be done on the main thread. We do dispatch queue.main.async. Now what we do here is that we do self.userdata, which would be equal to user data, and the user would actually be the user we get from here, or it gives us an auth data result. So I think the user should be a property inside the result. So there you go. Now that we have done this much, we change our is authenticated value to true as well, and we could add an optional print statement inside here as well, and I don't think so we need to do it inside the dispatch queue. So let's just write a print statement here which says success in signing in the user. Now what do we write in the catch statement then? So obviously there are two things that we need to do. We need to handle the error in some way. Supposedly that we need to show the user with an alert box or something. So what we could do here is we could actually write another function which would handle such errors. And why I'm writing another function here is because we would face the same issue with sign up also. What if sign up fails? What do we do then? So for that purpose, let's just write another function altogether, and it would be a private function obviously because none other than our view model would be referencing it. So we could write it as handle auth error. It would take in a parameter error which would be of the type error, and let's just for our convenience sake, let's not name the argument anything, so it becomes simpler to write also. Now we just optionally unwrap and see that if error is actually present. So if we do if let error equals error as ns error, and we check for one more condition, that let error message equals error dot user info, and this user info is actually a dictionary. So for that purpose we would actually have to look for a localized description of this error, and we could do ns localized. I think I'm writing this spelling wrong, so it is localized with a z, description key, v downcast is as a string. I mean, we optionally cast it as a string, and if all of this is true, we open parenthesis and then we show the user with a toast message. Now coming to this, we actually need to write a toast message function as well. So how about we complete that then? We do private func show toast message, and it would take in a message which would again have no argument name. It would be of the type string. When you open it here, we open a dispatch queue again, since we are changing the toast message values that we defined above. So basically this boolean comes true and this toast message will contain the message that we pass in. So for that purpose, let's do main dot async. Now we need to write self dot toast message equals message, and we do self dot show toast equals true, and then we could have one property which basically, so I was noticing this one thing, that how would we actually turn the toast message back off, because it's just a toast message, it won't contain any interactable buttons, right? So the user cannot dismiss it itself. What we could do is we could run a timer, and in a short span of time it dismisses itself. So for that purpose we would use this handy functionality, which includes dispatch queue dot main dot async after. We click on now plus 0.8 seconds, and inside this block of code what we do is we write self dot show toast message equals false, so it automatically dismisses itself as well. Now that we have run right this much, we could go about calling this function here. We could pass in the error message, and even if all of this is not true, we would still call the show toast message. Just give me a second. Okay, since we have done this much, how about we use this now? So inside our catch statement, we write dispatch queue dot main dot async again, and here we call our self dot handle auth error with our error which are catch block catches. We could remove this comment from now, and this much is handled. How about we just do the same thing for sign up as well now? So sign up will obviously also check for email and password if they are empty or not. And let's just copy this whole block as well, but this time it won't be signing in, but it would actually create a user. And now that we have done this much, it would have a user data, self authenticated true, success in creating the user, and the error would actually be the same only. So now that we have written these functions and we have handled the authenticated check on the main view, it's time to see if it actually works or not. So how about we run the app? Meanwhile, on the side, I have opened my authentication section of my Firebase. So I would recommend you do the same as well. And hopefully, if we go to the sign in method, I think we don't really need to enable something. Email and password enable. Okay, so we actually had to enable this thing. And now if we go to the users and we would be signing up, so let's just call the first user as sample@gmail.com. Let's have the password as password itself. We do a sign up and it actually signed us in, and it says success in creating the user. What if we refresh it here? So hopefully we see our user here now, and the user has a user ID and it has an email, and we have successfully stored all those two values inside our user data property in our view model. Now what happens if I close the app and I run the app again? That's good that it works. Now we could do the sign out also, and the sign out works fine. Our user is still present because it's not deleted or anything. I think we can only delete it from here itself. How about we do a sign in now? So we write sample@gmail.com and the password would be password, and we do sign in and it signs us in. So we have successfully integrated signing in, signing up, and signing out with email and password. And there are few improvements that need to be done in terms of how we are handling the switch between our views inside of here. So we would look into that in the further videos, and also we will move on to creating the main user profile now. So this was just the authentication part, but now we would have to look into creating a database user, which would actually be using Firestore, so that we could add more data to the user, such as a username, user profile image and sorts, and all some sub collections as well. So I hope to see you in the next video. And in case you have any doubts, please feel free to just add them in the comment section. I would be happy to help. Thank you so much for watching this.